Today, we enter part 2 of my series called The Path of Prosperity. Last week, when we covered part 1, we left you all with the intention that we were all going to become pregnant. Remember? Okay, how are you all doing with that? If you weren't here, we were talking about possibilities. And that every one of us as a child of God is pregnant with possibilities for greater good in our lives. And that essentially we are all growing and expanding in various ways and in consciousness and giving birth to new expansive ideas that take us into a grander experience of life and living. And so, Jesus taught us that there is a no-limits God that has brought us into this world, a no-limits God. And he said, I came that you may have life, and you may have that life more abundantly, more. We know the more that he was talking about is more than simply material things, and it's more than just meeting one's needs of life, but it has to do with things like more love and more peace and more joy and happiness and more freedom and more life-giving energies flowing through you. That there are moments in time where you feel that moving through you and you want to open to that more consistently and allow it. That is prosperity. You have that feeling coming through you where you are connected. And you know that the joy is not just your joy, it's God's joy actually manifesting through you. And the love that's coming through you, it's not just your love, it's the love that is a universal love that's been given to you, that you're a part of, that connects us to all. It's a very powerful thing. And so we come to learn that there is absolutely no lack in God, that God is infinite, okay? And, have you ever really looked around and wondered why you have what you have and others have what they have? And, when I was a young guy, my teens I'm referring to, we're young a long time, I know, but anyway, I'd ask the question, why some have a little and why some have a lot. I just kind of look at that and why some seem to experience limitations and others seemingly experience unlimited good, and some people seem to prosper and others seemingly struggle in that particular area. And I noticed, as you've probably noticed, that we all get to create it differently. There's all kinds of levels of experience, from the street person sleeping under an overpass to the varying levels of middle class to the wealthy who live in mansions and have no end of physical material goods. Why so many different levels of experience? And I'd ask that question of myself. And at one time, people rationalized that it was God that decided who would be the haves and who would be the have-nots, that somehow God rationed it all out. And so somehow, if it wasn't happening for you, you just weren't on the inner circle with God. And but then we got to see that really there are good people who have a little and struggle with that, and there are good people who have a lot, and there are people who are not really there yet, not so good, that have a little, and the not so good that sometimes have a lot. And so I would look at that, and I'd wonder about that, and I didn't necessarily know the answers, but I knew that there were answers to that. And then I learned about the fact that there are spiritual laws and principles and practices that one must come to learn about and understand and come into harmony with. And that a person then, by the nature of their thinking, really, and their consciousness, are either pushing prosperity away or they're pulling it toward them magnetically, simply by their understanding and application of these principles and practices that exist. And so last week we talked about how important it is to understand that there is this one invisible substance that stands beyond the universe, or invisibly, if you will, throughout the universe. It's out of which all form comes, all the material world comes, and that this is thought stuff. If you want to think of it as though there's this invisible clay that is being molded and shaped somehow, and if you understand quantum physics, you understand that there are these invisible dynamics going on in the universe, and somehow that formless comes into form, and that it is infinite, this substance, and that it is inexhaustible, never runs out, that it is alive, it has intelligence, and it responds to our thinking, to our engaging with it. And, as we've come to understand, there is a mind-body connection that goes on, and so whatever is going on in our mind, whether we're really stressed and anxious and worried and unhappy and miserable or resentful or angry or whatever, those are energies that actually our whole body gets to experience. And there's a mind-body connection. And so we're out of harmony all the way through, not just in our mind. And that as we move to love and light and joy and peace and harmony, that our body actually then reflects that as well. There's a mind-body connection. We understand that. We accept that. Okay? Well, why not a mind prosperity connection or a mind invisible substance connection? And so you get where I'm going, that if you understand that we have it with the physical form, we also have it with the invisible form. If you understand and grasp that beyond our ability to see, there is a substance that we're in connection to. There's a mind-substance connection. And the reason that it's important then to know about this substance or this thought stuff is to realize, really to get the sense that there is no lack. Lack is non-existent. That's just a perception, that's a false understanding. Yeah, we have experiences of it. There's no lack of this. The only lack is basically then our understanding of this substance. Our lack of understanding of this substance and the laws and principles that help to manifest it. You may recall that story that's in the New Testament in which the disciples are out fishing and they didn't have any luck. And this is a story that is loaded with prosperity principles. And they fished all night and they caught nothing. And, they're Jesus' disciples. They're supposed to know how to do these things. Some of them were fishermen themselves. How demeaning to come back and it's, the break of day now, dawn, and they're coming back to shore. And they're discouraged and they're tired and they're, kind of grumpy probably. And there was this question that Jesus calls out. Have you anything to eat? They all were a bit glum. They'd love to have said, yeah, we had this great catch. Come on, let's have a shore lunch. But nothing. Some of them claimed to be fishermen and not even a minnow. And so they say, no, we've labored all night, Jesus, and we've got nothing to show for it. And so then Jesus, of course, you know the story, he says, well, let me tell you, you just go on out into the deep out there again and toss down your nets on the right side of the boat, and you'll succeed in finding a catch. And you could imagine, if you were a person that had labored all night and had thrown your nets out all over the place and hadn't realized anything, that you would be arguing for your limitations. Do we really have to go out again and do this? But they followed, what Jesus had shared, the directions he had given them other times, so they followed the suggestion. They went out into the deep, as the story goes, and they dropped their nets on the right side of the boat, as the story goes, and their nets were filled, and so much so that they couldn't even lift them into the boat. They were so full. Now you have to understand, why is this story there? Do you think it's trying to teach us how to fish? Or that Jesus, the Christ, knows where the fish are and disciples don't? Or, what's it all about? It's basically a very mystical, metaphysical, wonderful lesson that really is there for you and I to understand some things way beyond and inside of the story itself. It's a wonderful thing. One lesson is, essentially, that all the while that they were having no results, there was an abundance there. Okay? There were fish there all the time. They weren't experiencing limitation, but there was no lack. You get what I'm saying? So universally, it's like you understand, no matter what your experience is being, that doesn't mean there's lack and limitation. And that's some of what that lesson contains in there. But abundance is there, it was always there. And although their experience was lack, that's not the reality. The reality is that there is always abundance, as there is always an infinite substance to draw on. And it's basically only our personal reality. We have a personal reality that we create, you know. They wanted to argue for their limitations a bit, but then they listened to this. Now, when Jesus enters the situation, you have to understand mystically and metaphysically what that's saying is what has entered is spiritual understanding. With the coming of Christ, with the coming of that presence, we now have coming onto the scene a spiritual understanding that can take us beyond the surface and into the deep, all right? And so the story is basically showing us that it's not what we do, but it's what understanding we bring to what we do. You know, when Jesus enters, we have a spiritual understanding. And now there's a whole shift. Now they were doing this, they were doing all the fishing at night. You with me? They were doing the fishing at night. And so that means they were in the dark. And it symbolizes basically doing what you're doing with a lack of understanding, which means there's a certain element of misunderstanding, lack of understanding, ignorance, spiritual immaturity, whatever you want, negativity, all of that. You're in the darkness, and our thinking is dark, our attitude is dark. We come up empty. And so Jesus came at daylight in the story, but you have to understand Jesus was the daylight. Jesus was the light of understanding, okay? And he was the understanding that brought right thinking, right attitude, right perception, right imaging, and that was symbolized in casting your nets into the right side of the boat, the right side of the boat, not right from left, but right from wrong, right from error, right from misunderstanding. So a person's not to stop doing in their life, you know, but to be doing with the light of understanding, the light of Christ consciousness, and the light of an understanding that there are laws and principles to be applied. And once you apply them, wow, what a difference. The nets are full in your life. You know, and what's in the nets except fish, and fish represent ideas, and ideas lead to prosperity. Ideas are the currency of the universe. So if a person is not in their right mind, then they will be left in limitation, you know. They're on the left side of the boat. So we have to ask ourselves, you know, I want to go into the deep. I want to be on the right side of the boat. I want to be right with reality. I want to be right with my attitude, my thinking. Otherwise, I'm on the left side of the boat and I'm left out. I'm in limitation. Now, who is it that was the richest in the Bible? Richest guy in the Bible? Solomon, okay? This morning earlier I said salmon. My mind went right to a fish. So Solomon was the richest, and do you remember how he came to be so rich? Well, you know, the Lord appeared to him in a dream. But before that, we're told that he loved God, which meant that he looked to God. There was a willingness to look to God. He had a love and an opening there. And so the Lord appeared to him in a dream, and in the dream he was asked the Lord said, ask of me anything, and I will give it to you. Ask of me anything. And really, the universe, God is always saying that to us, but we have different things that stand in the way. But anyway, it was noted usually that what did he ask for? We usually think wisdom, right? But if you look at some of the translations biblically, like the King James, it says that he asked for an understanding heart. And then a Revised Standard Version of the Bible says that he asked for an understanding mind. And I want to say here today, he asked for both. Because we want an understanding mind and heart, do we not? And so that's why I think it's there in both ways. But let's just read a bit of what he says in terms of his response to the invite from the Lord in this dream. He says, give thy servant me therefore, an understanding mind to govern thy people, that I may discern between good and evil, or good and not good, good and error, good and lack of understanding. And then after he asks for that, the passage says, it pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. And God said to him, because you have asked this and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right. That's exactly how it says. To discern what is right, like what's on the right side of the boat, like what's true reality that's right. Because you have asked that, behold, I give you a wise and discerning mind, heart. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor. Because you understand with the discernment of understanding in mind and heart that puts you right and right into reality comes all of the rest. It's back to where Jesus, or forward to Jesus, where he says, seek ye first the kingdom. And then all this other stuff will come. If you have that understanding of who you are, your relationship to it all, and you're stepping into that field of energy, that field of knowing, there isn't anything that can keep you back. It's just amazing because you're now accessing universal laws and principles that have always been there, but you have been in an evolutionary process of awakening to, disciplining yourself, and applying what you've come to understand. And so prosperity calls for understanding to discern what is right, okay? What is the reality of God? And we are experiencing pieces of the reality, or less than the full reality. And so with that understanding that we're looking for, we will come to understand that, whatever you focus on the most in life, you will get the most of, right? Makes sense. It's not magic. I like to say, it's no hocus pocus, it's just changing your focus. Okay? And so another way of saying that is what gets your attention gets you. It's that simple. All right? So what's getting your attention in this life? And that's why we'll get sucked back into the world and everything the world is saying and how it is out there and so forth. But there's another reality on an invisible field. And are we able to stay and take a stand for that? Are we able to go deep on the right side of the boat, on the right side of life, on the right side of the mind, the right side of the heart? It's powerful, powerful teaching. Ideally, you just want to focus on what you want, of course, rather than on what you don't want. A personal story I have to share that will remind you of something in your life where, you realized something happened pretty powerful or similar. Anyway, I was a sophomore in college, and I had purchased a car when I was a senior in high school. I worked in a garden center, and so I bought a 57 Buick, just a big bomb. And it lasted a couple years, and then I was a sophomore in college, and it was dying. So I knew I had to get a car. I wanted it for the summer when I would get out after the end of my sophomore year. And so all of my sophomore year, I was thinking in terms of how am I going to get a car, what car do I want, and all that. And so I had fallen in love with a 1963 Chevy Impala. Okay, now this is 1968, so it wasn't a new car. It was a 63. This was 1968. And that's what I wanted. And so every time I passed one of them on the road, my head would go like that. I would see them everywhere, And it was like every time I did, my mind would say, that's what I want. That's what I want. And if somebody was in the car, I would say, see, that's what I'm going to be getting. Oh, just like that, only a different color. And, this is what I want, metallic blue with a white streak. And so anyway, that went on, and I didn't know how I was going to get it. I had $200 in the bank. That was it. And so now it's spring, and we're in the school, in school, and it's only a few weeks from school letting out, and I'm in the dorm on my floor, and there's this football player that was rooming down the hall, and his name was Stanislaw. And somehow we get in a conversation that my car is dying, I need to get a car. He said, oh, really, Cease? He'd call me Cease. Caesar, Cease. And He said, really, Cease? My parents are selling a car. They're just starting to sell it. I said, oh, really? What kind of car is it? He said, it's an Impala. I said, really? What year is it? He said, 1963. I said, really? I said, what color is it? He said, metallic blue. I said, really? I said, does this have a white streak along the side? He says, oh, yeah, how'd you know? So I said, look, are your parents in a hurry? He said, no. I said, well, just give me a few weeks. I don't know how, but that's my car. And I hadn't been in Unity or in these teachings yet. But I just asked for some time. And within a matter of days, my mother was on the phone as we would talk periodically when I'd be at college. And she was going over things. And she said, oh, by the way, I keep forgetting to tell you that Grandma's estate has settled. And all the grandchildren got $1,000. She had passed on 2 years previous. Took a while to handle all the paperwork. So you have $1,000 that's sitting here waiting for you. $1,000, $200, $1,200 is what they wanted for the car. $1,200 is what they wanted. So I knew what I wanted. I didn't know how I would get it. I imaged it. I didn't know and understand these principles. I later came to know them. But what I was able to do is have conviction in my declarations and in my affirmations. I had clarity in my thinking. I was able to, have a sense of later on learning these principles and understanding and looking back at this and saying, wow, these are the principles I was using. That was something that happened in my life. I was unconscious there. Now I'm conscious, and I have used that as a stepping stone, as a takeoff, as a trampoline, as a jumping point, is that, wow, this stuff, building the belief in that it can happen, understanding that God was helping me because I was asking God. I didn't know where $1,000 was going to come from to add 200 to my 200, all of that. So you're thinking of things in your life now. Now that's about a car, okay? Big deal. Just think about what is possible on the tangible or the intangible level for your life. Thoreau understood this principle, and he said, if one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life which he has imagined, he will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. So the question is, what are we advancing confidently in the direction of? Do you know what that is? Have you defined it? Do you know what is wanting to be experienced or brought into the world through you, through this life that you've been given to live? We're not trying to make God give something to us. We're trying to enter into a process of opening and expanding our sense of what is possible. We want to be stepping into the realization that we live in a universe that is pregnant with possibilities, and we want to give birth to some of those grand, wonderful things. Picture a man standing on a lawn, and his lawn is all brown, and he needs to water, and so he goes and he turns the faucet on where the one end of the hose is, and he goes to the other and is opening the nozzle to spray, and nothing's coming out, and he can't figure it out. And looks at both neighbors, and they have sprinklers sprinkling, so there's water here. And finally, he figures out he's standing on the hose. Standing on the hose. A lot of humanity is standing on the hose. The current is full. It's there. It's waiting in all its fullness. But we stand in the hose in various ways. One of the ways we stand on the hose is through unforgiveness. It's very important. If we block and crink and clamp down on love, then somehow we clamp down on prosperity as well, in various dimensions of prosperity. It's the most important, powerful energy in the universe is love. There are two kinds of unforgiveness of ourselves, unforgiveness of others. And if we're having a challenge in our prosperity realm, it can often be unforgiveness. We have to look at that, because that's where we could be standing on the hose. When I've been in India, they really emphasize that a lot. And of course, it's a universal teaching, forgiveness, to move things out of the way, to be loving. But they get very specific and say that basically, oftentimes, not every time, but pretty consistently, if a person over a long period of time has had a block in manifesting prosperity, it can have to do with unresolved conflict with the Father. Okay? So those of you who have any kind of unresolved conflict with your Father and have had struggles in prosperity, I recommend that you go get help and be taken through a process of release and letting go. And you can have a transformation. Because that's standing on the hose in a big way. It really is. And they have found that to be true. Another way that we stand on the hose is gratitude, lack of, being ungrateful. And if we're ungrateful, then we're not really seeing all of the things that are around us that energetically we go, wow, thank you, God, connects us to God. Instead, we're using all our time to say, oh, yuck, well, you know, this isn't happening, that's not happening. This, you know, all our focus gets taken away, and we miss what's there. And, you know, Jesus said, he who has, more shall be given, and he who has not, even that which he has will be taken away. And that applies to the dynamic of gratitude. You know, if you're not grateful even for what you have, and you're always focused on what you don't have or what's not working, even what you have may not be there any longer. So you need to spend some time on being grateful for what is, and that puts you into a whole nother energy that opens you up, and things begin to flow. It takes you off the hose. It takes you off your stance that says everything's worst, everything's bad, nothing's happening, nothing works, and all of that which the world sucks us into, which is the left side of the boat. Because there's another reality. Maybe invisible for some,